It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Well, hello there. Heidi ho there. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? Larry Alex Taunton is here today. Larry is an American author, columnist, and cultural commentator. He's a frequent television and radio guest and has appeared on CNN, CNN International, Fox News, Al Jazeera America, and the BBC. You can find his writings in The Atlantic, USA Today, and The Blaze. Larry has been quoted by the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Time Magazine, Vanity Fair, and NPR, and by Rush Limbaugh. He's written a book called Around the World in More Than 80 Days, and the book basically takes us on a tour of the world to various countries to get an impression of what America looks like from the other side of the pond and from the other side of the planet. And it's an interesting observation because I think many people in this country haven't seen America from the outside looking in. And it does tend to change one's perspective. Just as a footnote, this interview was recorded about 2 weeks prior to the presidential election, and we talked a little bit about it at the end of the interview. At this moment, the president has yet to be determined. So what we were talking about was the assumption that somebody was going to be the next president-elect on November 3rd. Well, that didn't happen. So what you might want to do is listen to the interview now and then come back to it once this mess of the election has been sorted out and use it as kind of a reference. So with that, we will be right back with Larry Alex Taunton.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps, record producer. This is my story about Elton John, working with him in those early years, going back to 1967 at Dick James, all the amazing tours, those first recordings, going through to Rocket Records. And it's an amazing story about his incredible rise to stardom and my part in that. So look forward to taking you on that journey. So here we go. Yeah, and to order this great audio CD, please just email me at stuartepps@talk21.com. That's Stuart, Stuart, Epps, EPPS, at talk, TALK, 21 in figures.com. Stuart Epps at talk21.com. Email me and I'll give you all the details for buying this brilliant audio disc. Thank you. Bye.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who signed the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
Love coffee, huh? But wait a minute. It seems like every time you finish a cup of coffee, you get all of these side effects along with it. Heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, acid reflux. As the world's first and only organic acid-free coffee, Tyler's Coffee is able to provide a healthier option in the solution for more than 100 million individuals who have sensitive stomachs or suffer from acid-related modalities. This is Tyler's acid-free coffee. Coffee without the consequences.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hi, this is John Morgan, production supervisor for DJC Productions, and you're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Larry Alex Taunton. Hey, Larry, how are you?
I'm doing very well.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Delighted.
Let's see. You want to give us a little bit of your backstory? And then I know you got a book to promote called Around the World in More Than 80 Days, more than in brackets. You want to just tell us a little about yourself first, and then we'll talk about the book?
Yeah. I'm an author, a columnist. I freelance, so I've written for everyone from USA Today and the American Spectator to The Atlantic and CNN. And I decided to write this book because I saw there was a great need for such a book. The data tells us that 69% of Americans have never been abroad. I would argue that the remaining 31% have mostly just been to Canada, Mexico, maybe a Caribbean cruise. And so when the New York Times declares, as they did last year in a headline, America is not great, they have no real basis for processing that, no means of comparing and analyzing. So I decided to do it for them. I went around the world in more than 80 days, literally circumnavigated the earth 3 times. And while I myself have been to some 55 countries, this book tells the story of a journey to 27 countries where I'm comparing the United States to those countries that the left would hold up for us as a model and say, these are the countries that we should be like. We're not a great country, and we need to be more like these places. And so I take the reader on a virtual tour and say, you know what? I think America is a pretty special place.
Well, I have to agree with you. And in fact, I want to go back to that statistic. I think you're right. The statistic I saw was that 95% of Americans have never left the Western Hemisphere. So I think that would be about right.
Yeah. I believe that. As I say, I think those who have, by and large, in my experience as a very extensive traveler, if I bump into an American in, let's say, Bangkok, I can almost put money on the fact that they've already been to Paris and London. Bangkok is way down the list. That's not the place Americans typically head to. So if they've been to Mexico and Canada and a Caribbean island, then the next place most Americans want to go is London or Paris.
Right.
So when they've been abroad, that's usually where they've been if they have been if they've been to Europe. Then maybe to Rome and Barcelona or something like that. But Americans, for the most part, and there's a reason for this, we're a continental power. I was doing an interview with a British radio station just a few days ago, and the guy was quite critical of the fact that Americans don't see the world the way Europeans do. I said, well, I mean, you could fit Britain inside the state of Alabama, quite literally.
True.
And you can very easily drive from Belgium to France to Luxembourg and Germany and Holland in a day. most Americans don't get abroad, and that is because it's very expensive, and it would require most Americans to get 2 weeks vacation a year, and it would require them to blow it all in a single go, and most don't want to do that. So in this book, I'm taking them around the world. It's adventure. I'm seeing, I'm shooting AK-47s with former Viet Cong, and I'm rappelling off the Great Wall of China and riding elephants in Thailand and dancing the tango in Argentina. But I'm also giving the reader a glimpse of what the rest of the world is like, a glimpse of what radical Islam, a glimpse of socialism, the Marxist ruin all over the world. And I'm making the argument that before we burn this country to the ground, which the radical left, it seems to me, wants to do, perhaps we should consider what the alternatives are.
That's the one funny thing, amongst many funny things, is that those people that are chanting death to America, and I'm thinking of the Portland rioters specifically and the ones in Seattle,
Sure.
They offer no alternative. They don't even offer any sort of demands, it seems. Usually people that are protesting about something. But I couldn't tell you what it is that they're protesting for.
Well, I think we need to make a distinction, and your point is well taken. But between the frontline, shock troops, the people you see who are burning the Bibles and the flags, and the businesses in Portland and Kenosha and Chicago and D.C. and New York and all over, and the organizers, that is the ideological underpinnings of the entire thing. I think that they're using young people. Black Lives Matter, for instance, which is quite openly Marxist, although they've just recently removed that language from their website, so I'm guessing that they've decided that doesn't sell very well. But they have an agenda. They have a very clear agenda of what they want. I think the young people that they're using don't have any real idea of what Marxism is, of what socialism is, of what it is that they're actually supporting. I think that these are people who are given some measure of meaning and being a part of something that they see as of great historical importance, and that they're on the cutting edge of history that has been true throughout history. So I think that if our expectation is that the guy who's throwing a Molotov cocktail, through the front of a Saks Fifth Avenue, that he's going to be able to articulate what it is that he's after, he's probably not. But the people who are actually running it, who are organizing it, who are funding it, they know very well what they're about, and they're fiercely anti-American.
Then I guess the next question is, well, what exactly do they want? They want to completely destroy the country and then do what?
Well, we just put up a video on, if you go to Larry Alex Taunton, that's TAUNTON, LarryAlexTaunton.com, my website. Just before I began this interview, we have been working on a video. It's a 15-minute video in which I explain the Marxist origins of Black Lives Matter. And I'm explaining from, Marxism and I'm speaking like an auctioneer in this little video, but we're going from Karl Marx all the way to white privilege. How are these things connected, and what, if anything, do they have to do with the Democratic Party? And that video you can find on the Fixed Point Foundation, YouTube channel. And it's about, does Black Lives Matter have a Marxist agenda? Is that what they're about? You can find that video there. But the agenda is Marxist in nature, and it's hard to explain all of that in sound bites, in a short interview. But essentially, what we are seeing is we're seeing Marxism being repackaged and made more fashionable to a younger generation that simply doesn't know any better. Now, you sound like you're probably roughly my age. My father fought in Korea and Vietnam. He was fighting Marxist ideals. that were being pushed in Southeast Asia and were being pushed in various parts of the world. I was taught correctly that these are evil ideas. They have led to the deaths of no less than 125 million people in the 20th century alone. I mean, that's a fierce body count. Marxism leaves nothing but ruin wherever it goes. It has the opposite of the Midas touch. Everything it touches turns to crap.
Yeah.
We enjoy extraordinary prosperity and freedom in this country. People in this country, generally speaking, are not oppressed. Those who think they are victims have no idea, for the most part, what real victimization is. And so my purpose in Around the World in More Than 80 Days, discovering what makes America great and why we must fight to save it, is to give people a glimpse of what the rest of the world is like. So, for instance, one of the countries that I visit, in each chapter is a country. One of the countries I visit is Nigeria. And there in Nigeria, you see Marxist militants, Islamic militants, and the Fulani herdsmen militia, and then the Boko Haram, are slaughtering people in that country, specifically Christians, burning them, disfiguring them, dismembering them, destroying their homes, driving them off of their ancestral lands. This is what authentic victimization and persecution looks like. I take you to various terrorist sites all over Europe. I mean, we just had one last night. A teacher was beheaded in France. I'm sure you've seen this headline.
Yeah, I did.
And media is not really telling you what's happening. New York Times had a headline that said that there had been an attack on a teacher, but didn't state what the reality was. It wasn't simply an attack. This teacher was beheaded by a Muslim militant. Wasn't beheaded by a Amish, by a Buddhist, by a Hindu, by a Jew, by a Christian, but it's the same old story. It's what's happening all over Europe. And so I give you a picture of that, and I also take you to places that are still trying to come out of their Marxist past. Countries like China, like Russia, like Vietnam, to give you a glimpse of the ruin that is caused there, not just economically, but socially, the toll that is taken upon human life.
I want to go to Scandinavia for a second, because that's the one.
Everybody does.
Yeah, that's the one that, specifically Bernie. And I thought it was funny that Bernie got schooled by the president or the prime minister of Denmark when Bernie kept calling Denmark a socialist country. And the president of Denmark said, "We are not a socialist country." And it was a letter that was published.
Yes, I actually
Did you
quote
see that
in the book.
Oh, okay. So my understanding of, now I've never been to Scandinavia, but my understanding of Scandinavia.
I included in the book as one of the central arguments.
Okay.
So I made sure there were certain countries that had to be included, and Scandinavian countries needed to be included. In this case, specifically Sweden and Norway.
Okay.
But anyway, continue.
So my understanding is that, let's just take Sweden. Sweden is a free market capitalist country, with very strong social welfare programs that are paid for by the people at 75% income tax rate, something like that. Is that accurate?
I couldn't say what the tax rate is, but it's quite high.
Yeah.
It is quite high, no question.
And one of the reasons why I think that or those particular programs may, and I'll stress may, work in a country like that is because it's a very small population. It's a very homogenous population. It's one race, one religion, up until recently when they allowed hordes of immigrants coming in. But before that, and they also don't pay for their own national defense. We take care of that. So it's easier to get a group of people like that to agree to increase their taxes. Okay, everybody pay more, and then we'll have free education and free health care for everyone. It's impossible, or nearly impossible, to see, inconceivable to see in America. We can't agree on anything. And in order for socialism to even begin to work, everyone has to agree. That's why they killed all the people who weren't politically correct, to quote Chairman Mao, because everyone has to be in agreement whether you like it or not. I just find it incredibly ironic that people are trying to sort of shove that down our throats in this country, when the whole point of this country is that we have the right to disagree peacefully.
Yeah, well, precisely. And listen, Scandinavia, there are many remarkable things about Scandinavia, many things that I dislike rather intensely about Scandinavia. But Scandinavia is often held up, along with the soft socialist democracies of Western Europe, France, and Germany in particular, are often held up by the left as the models. This is what we need to be like. Well, I spent a lot of time in Europe. I'm there 2 or 3 times a year. I've lived there, and I'm very familiar with what is going on there. And I will tell you that, just as you have characterized it, Scandinavian countries, we're talking about small, generally, until recently, as you pointed out, homogenous populations. Furthermore, very oil rich, and these are not socialist countries. These are, as you pointed out, these are countries that are capitalistic, strongly capitalistic, with a generous social welfare safety net. Right. And so there's a big difference between that and socialism. And trying to reproduce that in this country, is a country of more than 300 million people, is a little bit more difficult. And I would argue that it's not working very effectively in those countries, but it certainly has the window dressing of doing so. And again, there are a lot of mitigating factors. If you point out, our military presence has generally served as a deterrent, NATO and so forth, playing a major role in their defense, which they don't spend any meaningful income on. So these are not fair comparisons, and they're certainly not socialistic.
No. You said there was some things about Sweden that you didn't like. Tell me what your impression was, or something that you did not like about the country.
Well, very interestingly, Sweden and Norway, I would have said to you, I'd never been to either, and I'd probably been to, 35 or 40 countries before we started this project, but I had not been to Scandinavia. And if you'd have asked me ahead of time what they were like, I would have probably suggested to you, I would have guessed that Norway and Sweden works very different. In fact, they're extremely different, which surprised me quite a lot. I liked Norway much more. One of my boys who was with me, I liked Norway too, and he said that Sweden reminded him of Stepford, which I thought was interesting, because there was a certain kind of truth in that, meaning sameness was celebrated. Greatness wasn't celebrated, but sameness, not standing out from the collective, mediocrity in a sense,
okay,
was celebrated. And I also thought it was very interesting that in listening to taking a couple of tours, tours could be a very interesting way to learn about a country, and touristy or not, because tour groups. A local tour will tell you what the locals think is important, what they want you to know about them. And, you don't want to rely on that completely. You don't want to rely on anything completely, whether it's just, reading the data in an archive, a library, or, exploring on your own, but you want to have a nice mix. And listening to the Norwegians themselves, they celebrated their own neutrality in the world wars and their ability to profit off of both sides, which of course strikes me as quite cowardly and unscrupulous. But the Norwegians saw it as being quite savvy. They let the The Germans use their, I have this right, the Germans used their railways during the Second World War, and the Allies used their airfields. So, and yet profiting off of both sides is rather a Machiavellian take on things. The Norwegians were quite different. They were much more, the debates that are going on in both countries over immigration are very real and quite similar, because both are seeing a spike in rape, in gang rape, in terrorism, and they have opened the door to extremism, and now they're not sure what to do about it. And there are those who would suggest that this is all being blown out of proportion, it's not that big a deal, and there are others who are saying this is ruining our culture. And I tend to agree with the people who fall into the second category.
Well, culture is another interesting thing, because it's much easier to define in countries like Sweden, Norway, perhaps, but particularly the one I'm thinking of is Japan, because I've been there. And the Japanese, my impression of Japan was that it was the most pure country in terms of homogenous.
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of a homogenous society.
The data shows, the data in fact reflects they're not quite the most monoculture country in the world, but they are right there near the top. So I want to say that 98% plus of Japan's population are ethnically Japanese.
Okay, yeah, but even
so you're correct.
Even at that, it was this notion of, now it was changing when I was there. I was there in the 90s, and it was really changing with the young people. But the older Japanese were still very conformist. I can remember being in Shinjuku at rush hour and seeing just a sea of gray suits and white shirts and people going to work, coming to work. And, you hate to make a stereotype, but everybody did look alike. And I don't think it was just racially. It was the way they dressed, the way they walked, the purpose that they had, the look of purpose on their face when they were going. It was just amazing to me that it was like robots. And a friend of mine who is Asian American, he came from Guangzhou actually, and he became an American citizen. And he had a great way to sort of sum this up about the difference between Western and Eastern culture. He said in Western culture, particularly American culture, we use the phrase, the early bird catches the worm, where, this is the greatest thing, is to be first, to be different, to be there and to do it first. And in the Asian Eastern countries, their attitude is the nail that sticks up gets hammered in. And I rather like that comparison because it was true. I saw it. Conformity is sort of the norm in Japan. In sticking out, it's frowned upon. We're here with us. That's the whole point, is to be different, is to be unique. So quite a different comparison in the way that the thinking is.
Well, what you're speaking to there is a hallmark of socialist societies. I would say it's not quite as true of Japan as you might think, as compared to, say, China, as compared to Russia, as compared to Vietnam, where, to quote a very similar Russian proverb, the tallest blade of grass is the first to be cut by the scythe.
Right.
So a very, very similar kind of mentality. Don't stand out from the collective. Mediocrity is celebrated, and that's true of a place, as I've just mentioned, in many regards, like Sweden. Tradition is appreciated a great deal more in Japan, and in Asian culture, it runs much deeper, although American influence, both positively and negatively, runs very, very deep throughout Asia, in fact, throughout the world. the Japanese would themselves tell you that no nation has more influence on them than America, American pop culture and whatnot. But that all remains very, very true.
I suppose what's interesting, or maybe ironic, and this is probably a good pitch for freedom and democracy, is that you need at least the foundation of a country like that as a base for socialism. And yet the countries that had the strongest sense of that, the nail that's sticking up gets hammered in, like China and Russia, both had communist governments that essentially failed. I mean, it definitely failed in Russia, and China sort of reeled it in heavily in the 80s and 90s. Otherwise, they were going to be stuck back in the feudal ages. It was a completely agriculture-based society, and they all of a sudden decided that we better catch up to the rest of the world. So they reeled in all of their heavy communist sort of restrictions on capitalism. And look at all the millionaires that came out of both of those countries once the collapse of communism. Although technically China is still communist, but it really
I would argue, and I do make this argument in the book. I do make this argument in the book. China is not communist. China is communist in name only.
In name only,
Vietnam,
right.
They are fascist. They have combined a free market economy with a totalitarian regime.
Yeah.
And that's what they are now. The only people who think that Marxism works, people who are burning buildings in America. The Russians know that Marxism doesn't work. The Soviets, the Chinese and the Vietnamese, they all know that it doesn't work. They've long since abandoned Marxist economics, and they have embraced a free market capitalistic society. What they haven't embraced is democracy.
Right. Well, there's fights on that. Hong Kong was certainly pushing to try to keep as independent as possible, although I don't think it's going to happen. And now the riots are starting in Thailand. I've seen the huge protests over there, twofold protests against the king and the monarchy, which is unusual because the old king was revered almost like a god. But once he died, the son took over, and the son is not in the same league as his father was. And particularly the students now are saying, you know what, enough of this stuff already. We want our freedom. The general who has ran Thailand for the last 6 years took over in a coup. He was not freely elected. And the protests in Bangkok are enormous now. They're the biggest ones they've had, at least from what I've seen on the news.
Yeah, I can't comment too much on that. I did spend some time in Thailand, and it's a very interesting country, and rode the Railway of Death there, which is the bridge on the River Kwai, and I tell something of that story. But these are countries that are seeking to develop their economies, and that are often struggling with ethnic minorities and with terrorism, with maintaining their borders. And again, this just gives a picture of the problem that I'm trying to reveal to the reader, and that is that America is unique, and it's the greatest country in the world, and it's been my pleasure to talk about it.
Well, no argument from me. We do have to wrap this up, and I just want to get one last question, and then we'll wrap it. The election is coming up in a couple of weeks, in case you forgot. And obviously the stakes are very high in this one. Give me your opinion of either scenario. In other words, if Trump wins, what do you think will happen on the next day? If Biden wins, what do you think will happen on the next day?
Well, I think that if Trump wins, the Democrats are going to rush to the courts. They will not accept. They've made it very clear. They've been quite open about this in social media and in their own speeches that they do not accept the electoral process. They do not respect the will of the American people. They don't respect the Electoral College. They want to abolish it. They will contest the election. They're lining up their lawyers to do it now. They're prepared to steal the election. Indeed, I don't think Democrats can win this election via anything other than theft. I just don't. I've sat and talked to Harvard PhD, a researcher, a man by the name of Robert Epstein, who says that and now this has been revealed in a very big way in recent days with the suppression of the Biden-gate story of what's going on with money that he's been pocketing, but Vice President Biden from China and Ukraine.
Good old Hunter.
But the big tech suppressing the New York Post story, which is has a basis in fact rather than just rumor and innuendo and in fabricated materials. But Epstein would argue that the big tech companies have long been endeavoring to ensure a Biden victory. That's what we're seeing. It fascinates me no end that people who see themselves as part of the quote unquote resistance, that they're somehow going against the establishment with rioting in the streets and protests, when in fact they're aligned with Hollywood. They have the support of Hollywood. They have the support of mainstream media. They have the support of big tech, and they have the support of the Democratic Party. In other words, they are the establishment. The resistance, the real resistance, are just common, decent, everyday Americans who very frequently live in the so-called flyover country.
Right.
And Democrats have a very elitist attitude regarding them. So I think if Trump wins, I think we'll have weeks and months of disputes over ballots and whatnot. I think if Biden wins, I think that Democrats will move very rapidly towards installing their radical agenda. And they have a radical agenda. We are seeing just in recent years, just in the last few years, the utter radicalization of the Democratic Party, which I could never have seen going full on Marxism. And that's the direction we see it going. Joe Biden himself will be pushed in that direction, and he'll soon be discarded, and it will be a Kamala Harris administration. It's clear that that the Biden is not well, and that he's not all there.
No.
And Kamala Harris is unquestionably a radical. So I think that it's game over for America as we have known it if Democrats win. I mean, this is an election between those who love this country. Doesn't mean they think it's perfect or that there aren't things that we need to address. I, as a Christian, feel very strongly that there's many things that need to change in America, but I recognize its inherent goodness. I recognize that it's a truly great country where people can flourish, where human flourishing is encouraged, it's real, it's authentic, it's available, and that the American dream is a real thing, and that it is denied to the overwhelming majority of people around the world. And so it's people who love America and people who don't. That's what this election is about.
Do you think civil war is a possibility? I mean, a real civil war?
Oh, Lord, I hope not. I hope not. But I have said on social media I would be in favor of an amicable separation. I would be in favor of an amicable division. I want nothing to do with California. California you're seeing an exodus out of California.
Oh yeah,
because of the brownouts, the
fires, everything.
Taxation, it's absurd. Governor Newsom's radical agenda there. I think Californians are free to live the way they want to live. I think that the rest of us are free to do the same. And in other words, I'm in favor of self-determination. I am in favor of states' rights in that sense. And I would certainly be in favor of, rather than seeing this country come to actual blows, as you suggest, and who knows, maybe that's a real thing. I would prefer to see an amicable division. But who knows where all this will go? But there's no question that what we're seeing is the parentheses of this country want to dominate the whole event. And that's highly problematic.
All right. Well, Larry, thanks so much for coming on the show. We do got to wrap this up. My guest is Larry Alex Taunton. The book is called Around the World in More Than 80 Days. It's available on Amazon, I assume, and all the fine usual outlets for books.
So yes, it is. It's available everywhere. Simon & Schuster's the distributor, and you'll find it everywhere. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Do you have a website just to give out?
Yes, Larry Alex Taunton, Taunton, LarryAlexTaunton.com. You'll find all of my articles, interviews, and so on housed there.
Great. Thanks a lot, Larry. Thanks for coming on. This was a nice conversation.
All right, take care.
Take care.